is not written in accent, and only the dialogue, only the...
It is written in accent because the narrative, although it's in third person,
Right.
it's third person close,
Right.
and it moves very fluidly in and out of whoever the scene's perspective is. And so it's not a typical third person omniscient that's that far. So the voice of the narrative really does mimic the voice of the characters when they're speaking in dialogue. Good question. Any other questions? Hey, Noelle. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you. Noelle is responsible for me being here, so thank you to you.
I was just wondering, how long did it take you to write the novel, and how many drafts did you go through?
I couldn't even tell you how many drafts, but the first incarnation of this piece was back in 1992 when I wrote it as a short film. And I wrote it for a friend to direct, and he liked it, and so he hired me to write it as a feature. And so I did a feature draft. And then he felt like the feature draft wasn't, it didn't have enough of a commercial hook, and Basic Instinct was out at the time, and he wanted to turn it into a thriller, so I wrote it as a thriller, and it was horrible. And then I started working, like I stopped working with him, and I started actually getting hired as a screenwriter, and I just kind of abandoned that, but I had kept the initial full draft, and so I used that to write the first draft, and then I don't know how many drafts there were. I did a full draft that I finished in 2005, and that actually went out to big publishers via a New York agent, and it didn't sell. And then I went to Antioch, where you also went, and I did some more work on it, and then I did more drafts. I honestly don't know how many drafts, at least 10. So I did, a couple of passes for the editor. I did a couple. I just lost count. It was so long, but way more than a trained writer would have to do. I didn't know how to write a novel when I started writing it. I hadn't gone through the MFA program. I didn't know what I was doing. I just winged it, and when you wing it, you end up having to do a lot more work on it. So it was a long process. Yes.
When you're writing from, personal perspective sometimes, do you find it difficult to refrain from using your experiences or what you're surrounded by? Do you try to make write dialogue neutrally, if that makes sense?
Nope. I do not. I use whatever tools I have. If I have something that came from my own life that's emotionally resonant for me and will work for that character, I have no problem using it. And I tell people in my life, if you don't want it to be in something, don't tell me, because I will use it. Nothing is off limits unless it's really going to really hurt someone else. I wouldn't take somebody else's life and exploit their life for my own fiction. But if if the scene happened to me, I will use whatever's in there, including what that person said to me. If it works, if it's interesting. Now with some characters, they're nothing like me at all, and so I can't necessarily use my own emotional perspective or my own life because we have no similarities. So in that case, I would probably refrain from using my own stuff because it wouldn't be authentic to that other character. Sometimes it could be, certainly a character could be completely different from me, come from a completely different background, and still have felt the same kind of feelings, but I can't impose feelings that happen to me on a character who's had a different life where that wouldn't make sense. I can't trick myself into thinking that that's going to work. And so in that case, yeah, I do have to look at it critically, or somebody will tell me, somebody will read it and say, I don't believe it. They'll say, that sounds like you. That doesn't sound like the character. And then I know it doesn't work, and I have to try again. So only in those cases. But with these two characters, there were no holds barred. Whatever I want I used, and sometimes it was close to life.
Do you feel like, sorry,
Thank you.
do you like create your, like, do you know where you want them to end up before you start writing? Or does it kind of just happen and you start to feel their life more?
With this book, I had an initial ending that really didn't work. That was like in the screenplay version, I tried to sort of tie the whole thing up, make mother and daughter reconcile and work everything out in a scene at the end, and it was ridiculous. Like the issues are just too deep to be tied up like in a 2-hour script. It just didn't work, and so that's why I tried to redo the book. And I did know that I wanted to write towards a place of healing. I didn't want both characters to end up in a place where they were both still feeling terrible and in a dark place. I wanted it to end with some sort of forgiveness and transformation. So that's as much as I knew. And to get to that, I did sort of just find my way through, but I did always have a destination, where there, in my mind, like, and everybody interprets it differently. In my mind, there's peace. Other people don't see it that way, but that's what I used as my barometer to get, towards the end, to write towards that end, was to get to like some closure with peace. Yes.
So you had me like close to bawling out there in the hall. And I was just thinking, do you get readers that tell you, me too, like I felt that too, and how is that experience when people really connect with what you?
It's the best thing ever. Thank you. Of course, I love that. I mean, you write to move people. You don't want to write where people are just like, oh, cool, thanks. I mean, I want people to be moved by it and, connect with it in some way. And some, everybody doesn't connect with that scene. Some people might get more out of the humor than the other stuff. So, but you can't please everyone, but you try at least to engage people on an emotional level. So I appreciate that you had a response. Thank you.
Tony, can I give you, because I was going to ask a question, I think it ties nicely to this.
Okay, sure.
Because of your presentation and the way you read, and we chatted about your background, but I don't know if you want to share that. A lot of our students are going to read like at our open mic, and then we do events at Gatsby's Books in Long Beach. Could you speak a little bit about how you select the piece you're going to read and about your presentation? Because I think a lot of times it's nerve-wracking to get up in front of a group of people, but I'm just going to say, all the readings I've been to, this was one of the most enjoyable just because of your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And I was in tears and then laughing. And so can you maybe talk a little bit about, because a lot of our student writers are going to be presenting, and I think that's a component we don't often get to talk about.
My advice is when you're going to read in public, try to pick a piece that you connect with, that you enjoy reading, and that feels like it could be crafted to be a performance rather than just a piece of narration that's just giving information. Like if you can get a scene or a monologue, that tends to work better in performance, which, I mean, that's maybe too great a word to use for authors. You don't have to perform, but if you're reading in public, people do expect you to engage them in some way. So I would look for the pieces that are fun, that have some sort of audience appeal. And then my advice is to really, really prepare. Like if you have a reading in July, start prepping in May and learn that piece so well that you're so confident and prepared that even if you're nervous, you can do it, it. What I do is I read it, but I also tape it into my iPhone, and then I play it when I'm at the gym, and I just have it over, and I listen to it like over and over and over and over, and it kind of sinks in. If you're an auditory learner, which I am, I mean, if you're a visual learner, then study the text, but if you're an auditory learner, then just listen to it over and over and over. It will sink in, and you'll be surprised. Like when you get to the page, it'll just be there, and it really helps to be very prepared. Like I've been doing this a long time, so I don't get as nervous as I did. But when I was starting out, preparation will really, really give you more confidence than if you just like read it over once the night before and then you get up there. You're gonna shake, you're gonna be nervous, people are gonna be talking, coming in and out, and you have to kind of train yourself to be able to hold your concentration. And if you don't know your piece really, really well, you won't be able to maintain your concentration when somebody's coming in and sitting and stuff. It can be very distracting. So really, really try to know it and just pick a piece that feels fun. Yes.
I wanted to find out more about the publishing process and choices you made, whether you considered self-publishing, whether you looked into
I
bigger
I did
houses.
not consider self-publishing for this book. I've self-published self-help books. I have an anti-aging book and a skin book, but as a new novelist, I did not want to self-publish, and I wasn't. That would have been a last resort, and I probably would have been very depressed to have self-published. I so didn't want to self-publish that I was actually asking people to start presses. I published a story in a literary journal. I was like, your journal is so good. Why don't you like publish novels? Like, 1 or 2 a year. Like, I like anybody but me, please publish this book. And it was hard. It went out that first time I had this agent, Marie Brown, in New York, and it wasn't as good. The draft wasn't as good, but she only went to big houses. So that was the choice then. The choice was to try to sell it to like the big five. None of the big five bought it. So I stopped hearing from her after that. But when I went through the MFA program at Antioch, I learned about small presses, and I was okay with that. I was okay to publish at a small press that did literary fiction, and that's where I published. I published at a very small press, local in Santa Ana, and they published literary fiction and some other stuff. And those you don't need an agent to submit to. So I also submitted to a really good small press called Akashic in New York, which I really recommend if you can get. You can actually directly submit there, and they were great. They encouraged me. The book went to committee there, but it wasn't unanimous, so they passed. But that gave me the momentum to say, okay, I'm going to hit like all these small presses. I also tried to get an agent with my cover letter, and I couldn't get an agent. So that's why I had to do small presses. Like if you're working on a book and you're gonna publish, I would recommend try to get an agent. Like and submit to, you will get rejected a lot, and I got rejected by like 5 agents, and then I was just like, I didn't have the patience. But if you really want your book to sell to a bigger publisher, stick it out with the agents. It might take 2 years, and it might take 100 rejections. Like some people, that woman who published The Help, she got rejected 60 times before she found an agent. For certain stuff, it's worth going through that process, and then you can go to a big house, and it still might not sell to a big house. It still might go, to a smaller house, but at least it'll get read.
Right.
So I recommend that. Like if I had it to do over, I might not have been so hasty to just get it out there. I would have tried. I now have an agent, and so I'm working on my next book, and I'm definitely, she's going to submit it, and we're definitely going to try to go, for a bigger publisher. But the small press experience is fine, and it was fine for me. But when you publish with a small press, you have to really sell your book yourself. You have to submit it to all the contests. You have to submit it, for readings and stuff. Like my publisher was very nice and supportive. He sent books where I needed them to go and stuff, but he didn't submit to any, like I had to submit it to everywhere. So the NAACP Image Award nomination, I got those books, paid the submission fee. So that's something to keep in mind. Like when you have a bigger press that has more money, they can afford to, to put the money into your book. But that's a whole nother story. Sometimes for some people, it's better to not get that advance money, because if your book doesn't sell and it doesn't recoup the advance, that is a strike against your career. So there are all kinds of things to think about. So it just really depends on what you really, really want. But I'd recommend trying to find an agent.
Can I ask you also about
Sure.
how you feel your MFA experience affected your writing?
Oh, it changed my writing completely. But it was also post-MFA, trial and error, working and continuing to workshop stuff with my classmates. And it just so happens that my mentor, my MFA, well, one of my MFA mentors is also my boyfriend. So, you know, I had that advantage, but it really wasn't that helpful because we didn't get along like through that process. But, you know, if you have like, you know, a professor of, you know, of writing that it is close to you, yeah, of course, you know, use that. So that all helped, but I couldn't have written this book without having gone through the MFA. It's like it rings you, you know, turns you inside out and just gives you many more tools to use. Like there were just things that I didn't know about writing fiction that I couldn't have figured out on my own, even reading all the stuff that I read, like just having somebody point it out to me and explain it. So I recommend getting an MFA, but everybody doesn't need, I needed it, you might not. Like, you know, I am glad I did it, but I don't think everybody has to have an MFA. But I think if you really want your writing to have the best shot at expanding to its full potential, it's helpful. But you can also do it working, you know, there are classes like Jim Caruso has a class at Santa Monica College, and people like he's, you know, made people virtuosos. So like you could do that. There's a guy in LA, what's his name? Jack Grapes, who's a really good writing teacher. So there's other routes, but you do want to train with somebody. Don't do it by yourself. Yes?
I was wondering, your background in screenwriting, acting, Lee Strasberg and so on, do you think of your characters and plots in terms of cinematic terms? And if you do, did that change when you went through MFA?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you say that again?
I was just saying, you have a background in screenwriting and acting and so on, and I was wondering if you think of your characters and scenes in more cinematic terms, or did that change because of the MFA program? Because people like Robert O.
Scenes are cinematic in fiction or on a screenplay. When you are writing a scene in fiction, you have to make it visual. You have to write it so that your reader can have something to visualize. So it's what's different is the choice of language, the way that you describe things. Like as a screenwriter, I was always able to, you know, write a screen when I came to my fiction, but what my fiction lacked was getting into a scene in an interesting way, or using knowing point of view well enough that I could pick third person, first person, second person, third person close, third person omniscient, like knowing what I could do while I'm in a scene. For example, like in third person omniscient, you can jump into each character's head within a scene. I didn't know that as a screenwriter. I knew how to write the lines, what they say, and I could write a little bit of description, but I couldn't write description in a way that was necessarily unique. And so in going through the MFA program and reading like a billion writers, I was able to learn, you know, what cliche is, like why I should not write the way, like the same description that I've read in every other book. So, you know, I knew what a cliche was, but I didn't know that well, like that it was terrible for literary fiction, you know. So those are the things that I learned, you know, but in terms of how to write dialogue, it's the same skill. And you're writing, you know, when you're writing a scene in fiction, like you're writing it so that somebody reading it can picture it. You know, you want to picture those people in the kitchen. And so it's not all, that part of it is not all that different from screenwriting. And even in classes, they would tell me, like, you, the narrator, are the camera. You're going to show, like, you, the narrator, are going to show me what I should be focusing on. Am I focusing on the, you know, what's in the scene? Am I focusing on the person's face? Am I focusing on what they, you know, so it's, you know, it's connected. So if you are learning how to write screenplays, it's not going to necessarily hurt your fiction, but you'll, you know, you have to learn a bit more.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Sure.
I wanted to ask, I got my start in screenwriting. I didn't get that far because I got discouraged, you know, of like countless hours, months of networking to get a 5-minute meeting, so some pompous ass kind of soured me on the whole industry. But I was wondering, I've been like away from that kind of pursuing something
Has it gotten easier?
Yeah, it's still like.
The only thing that's
I don't
easier,
wanna go back, but.
the only thing that's easier is that you can email scripts. That's easier. You don't have to print them out and hand them. But no, it's not any easier. Sorry. If you didn't like it before, you will not be pleasantly surprised. Yes.
I was just going to ask, in the three scenes you read, music seemed to play a large role in the narrative. There was the musicality of the language of the speakers and the characters, and the musical references. And so I just was curious to know what the rationale was behind those choices.
Well, they're a family of jazz musicians. So Serena is a jazz singer, Rico is a jazz musician, Kendall is a jazz musician, and Serena's partner, Jamie, is also a jazz musician. So they're in a musical world. Artie is really the only one who isn't. She's a photographer. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. Do you want to know like why I wanted to write about music?
Yeah, why a family of jazz musicians? Why not trapeze artists?
I used to sing jazz. I used to study jazz. I lived in New York, and my dad was a doctor who had an office in Greenwich Village, and I grew up going to jazz clubs. So I grew up. I'd seen Charles Mingus. I didn't know who he was, but I was a little kid. Like my dad also was a drinker, so he would take me to these bars, like where I'd be like 5, 6, 7 years old. Like there was food there too, but my dad would like be sitting there at a bar and there would be jazz playing. So I just grew up around it. Anyone else?
So this kind of ties into a previous question, but so like you said it was like as far as writing the book, that was a pretty long process. So did you ever find that there were times where like you kind of got discouraged and you're like, well, I have no idea what's gonna happen. Like I don't know if I can finish this. And like if there were times like that, sort of like, do you have advice as far as like how to keep writing and keep going and sort of like finish a draft?
I didn't think that I couldn't finish it because I had finished the screenplay, so I knew that I could finish it. But I definitely, I don't think anybody writes a novel without times where they are discouraged. And if they do, like, hats off to them, but it's hard. I mean, yeah, I had times like where scenes that I knew I needed just didn't work. They just didn't work. I didn't know how to make them work. And so that was discouraging. And a novel is just not something that I can write fast. It just isn't. And that in and of itself is discouraging because life is passing you by and you have this goal, and meanwhile, other people in their careers are sort of making strides and getting places, and you can only hope that when you finish your book, it will maybe do something for your career. There's no guarantee. And you don't know for sure that you're going to finish it. Even if you know that you can finish it, doesn't mean that's not a guarantee that you will. You know that you have the ability to, but I don't know. I wish I had some good advice. The only advice I guess that I have is to trust the process and just do little by little. Like try not to stop for long periods. Try to develop a practice if you can, where try to write every day if you can. That would be ideal. But if you can't write every day, at least try to do, as many days a week that you can, and just even if you can only write for an hour one day, like just keep writing, just keep trying. Even the days when it's terrible and it just doesn't work, and you write a whole thing and you're like, oh, I can't use this. You've still accomplished something because that's space in your consciousness that knows, okay, that doesn't work, so on to the next thing. So it's not wasted. It will feel wasted, and it'll feel very depressing. And it's not the only discouraging part of writing a novel. The next discouraging part is, can I get an agent? Can the agent sell it? Or if I don't have an agent, can I get it to a publisher? This is not a thing to do if you don't have grit. Like you have to have grit in the process of writing it, and you have to have grit in the process of getting it out there, and you have to have grit in the process of promoting it. So it's a good thing to do if you need to develop grit. But you can't do it without it. Like I don't envy anybody who like wants to do this, but it is rewarding once it's done. Like I don't regret that I did it, but I look back and I'm like, my God, how did I ever get through that? I mean, there were literally times when I was on the floor sobbing, just really like on the floor sobbing, thinking, should I really live? Like, do I just even want to go on? Like I'm not kidding. It was really hard. So, but I'm still here. So I guess that's advice. Like, don't kill yourself. Don't kill yourself. That's my advice.
I wanted to hear when you just said something about your career, and I'm curious. You've had all these different. Well, you've had some jazz singer.
I didn't have a career as a jazz singer. Let's just be clear.
I
studied
incarnations
right.
that have brought us to where we are today.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious, like, how you feel this book has affected your career. You're writing another one. Do you feel like you're going down the novelist path? And I have another question, and it was not coming to me right now. So
Okay.
maybe that
Well,
one.
I will say that the novel has not transformed my career to the point where, like, I'm in the stratosphere of success. It did not do that. But it has, having a published book makes me eligible to teach in an MFA program because I have an MFA, so it's accomplished that. It's accomplished a credit, wherein if people look me up on the internet, they can see, oh, okay, this person's published a book. Like, they're not just some fly-by-night, maybe they know what they're doing. It's also accomplished getting the attention of a top literary agent, even though she's not representing this book. She was willing to look at my new writing because of what I did to promote my book. Like, she knew through a mutual friend that I had done like all these submissions, and getting the NAACP Image Award nomination was pretty big for somebody like me because I was with a small press. I didn't have any, like, the people. I was at a table with Greg Pardlow and Claudia Rankine. Greg Pardlow won the Pulitzer. So, these are accomplished people, and I'm sitting in the mix, like, yeah, I belong here. So, I was aggressive with, when you have something, like, you can be aggressive. And I would say that, again, no, it didn't transform my career, but I got red carpet photos. Like, if you look up my images, like, I look like somebody, so you work it, whatever I could have done with this book, I did it. So that's what it did, and it's building a career. I'm not, hopefully this isn't my last book. I'm working on the next book, and you have to start somewhere. So it's a building block to a literary career that I hope to, continue forward.
So then I thought of my other question. I used to be a pantser, and now I see I have to be an outliner. Because are you an outliner or pantser or?
What's a pantser?
Pantser means you just go by the seat of your pants.
Oh.
And an outliner kind of,
I think both work. I think both work, and it depends on the person. Because I worked for so many years as a screenwriter for hire, I was trained to outline, and that's only because if you're writing a screenplay for yourself, you can be a pantser because there's nobody there asking you what are you going to do. But when you write for a studio, you go in and they say, well, you get a contract, and in the steps of the contract, part of it is the outline. And so they want to know what every scene pretty much is going to be, the first act, the second act, the third act. They want to know what the movie is before they even pay you and send you off to write it. And so that's been my training. And so I kind of do that anyway, but with this book, I did give myself an outline, and then I didn't stick to it, because when you outline a movie, it's different than when you do fiction. It just takes different paths. Like, the characters start talking, and they direct where you're going. So I think it is good to have an idea of where you're writing to. I guess I already said this before. Where you're writing to, but allow yourself the spontaneity and the artistry of discovery and exciting things that come up out of the writing that you couldn't have known while you're outlining. You couldn't have known these things until you start writing these people, and they're like, wow, she said that, or she did that, like, oh, what am I going to do with that? Like, you have to allow yourself, that's where your artistry and your choices come in. So if you outline every single thing, like, you might get a book that's fine, but it's not going to be exciting or surprising, because you'll know what's going to happen. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think just have a guide, and then you might want to outline sections if you know that you need to get to a certain place. If you know that you need a character to do something in order to move the plot in a direction, it might be helpful to try to figure that out in advance, and then go and do it and see what happens. And if it doesn't hit the mark of your outline, that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, that's my friend.
Can we get a little preview about what the next book is about?
Sure. The next book is a collection of stories, and some of them are available online. It's a linked collection of stories. In my mind, it was just going to be called A Linked Collection of Stories, but the agent is going to market it as a novel in stories. So it's similar to Sherman Alexi's The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven. Maybe some similarities. Well, I'm not going to even say the other one I was going to say, but sort of like that. Like when people, I don't know, were you in my workshop when we did that one with Alma? Like when we read that, a lot of people were thinking, oh, this is a novel, but it's not a novel. It's a story collection, but the characters are so linked, and there's progressions, and we see them in one age and then another age, and so it feels kind of like a novel. And as we were critiquing it, people were calling it a novel, but it's not a novel. It's a collection. So I think that's what I'm doing. Yeah. So if you want to see any, there's a couple of them. 2 of the stories are available online. And if you, one is called Time Travel, and in fact, a podcast of somebody else reading that just came out yesterday. I auditioned to read it myself, and I was rejected. So somebody else is reading my story, and the story is about my experience growing up as a person of color in an all-white community, and I had a best friend when I was little, and that best friend called me at some point after, friendship from birth to 6 years old, called me the N-word, and we never recovered. Like we were never close friends again. But then we saw each other when we were in our 20s, and he was so happy to see me. He was just so happy. Like I could tell this man loved me. He had in his mind, we were back when we were 3, 4, 5 years old, but I was still pissed. And then more years went by, and I got over it, and I forgave him. And so it's me. The story is me. And the reader who's reading it, she doesn't sound like she could have grown up across the street from this guy. She's very good, but it's not me. I'll just say that. It's so ungracious. Sorry. I take it back. Mm-hmm.
So kind of following up what you were just saying, how do you feel that really affected your writing and your career, being a woman of color, growing up in sort of the background that you have, and how much that sort of informed?
I think I'm probably not the best one to answer that. I think you reading it would probably be a better judge of that. It definitely informed. I mean, I write about race and class. This book isn't as much about race and class, although there's stuff about race in it, and colorism. There's people in my family who have passed for white. There's all of that stuff. So I grew up upper middle class. My father was a psychoanalyst in a working class white town. And so that's not a very common perspective. Most upper middle class African Americans are, somehow involved with the black elite in some way, either through social clubs, the Links, or Jack and Jill, or whatever. I had none of that. I was by myself in this environment. Didn't even know that existed. And when I found out, I was shocked and angry because oh my God, these are my people. I could have been with these people all this time. Why didn't you bring me to them? So that has definitely affected my writing, and just being being a woman of color in this country, you know, in this time period in history, has certainly affected me. So I think that they're so linked to my writing, because my writing is just an expression of my thoughts and my feelings and my experience and perspective. Of course, you know, of course that's there. But I couldn't tell you exactly how it's affected it. Like somebody else would have to identify that. I could try, but I might not be right. You know, somebody else would have to say that, I think. But it's a good question. Yes.
I want to know, like, did you feel like sort of a mascot, even when they were being nice? Because that's what I always felt like growing up in Northern California. Being the only black kid in the whole elementary school.
I didn't really think I was a mascot. I did feel like I was the other, and that I was like part of the group, but not really, not fully, not as much as everybody else. But I didn't I wasn't allowing anybody to like pat me on the head like a mascot.
No,
Like
not like that. Like, I can get into so much trouble. Any trouble I went into, I never ever was punished. There was so fear of being.
Oh no. I'm older than you, so when I was growing up, I got into all the trouble. Anything that went wrong, it was like I was the person of color, so I was the one that they looked to
They
first.
didn't want to point me as the only little colored child we've ever had. So we can't punish her.
There was one other girl, black girl in my school. We looked nothing alike, and they would mix us up all the time. And she didn't get in trouble. I mean, I wasn't a troublemaker, but if there was something that happened in the class, like I was not infrequently like suspected. But it wasn't me. I wasn't a bad kid. Any other questions?
Did you say you studied?
I'm sorry.
Did you study music?
Not really, a little bit, but I didn't really study music. I studied singing, voice. So I trained with a jazz singing teacher, but I didn't go on to do that. I just took lessons, and I sang a few places, like in public, but I didn't have a career.
Yeah.
There was one more question.
That was it.
Oh, okay.
I
Are you
wanna
done?
say thank
Okay,
you for
thank
sharing
you
your
guys.
time.
Great questions.
We do have some refreshments in the back, so please feel free to help yourself. And we also have copies of Remedy for a Broken Angel. They're $15, and book signing, and feel free to ask if you were some formal questions if you want to mingle for a little bit. But thank you for joining us today.